Speaking of things that I have nothing bad to say about, there is this thing called Christian missions. And Christian missions really didn't form in earnest until 150, 200 years ago. The wealth and evangelical spirit of American Christianity is what gave birth to international missions as we know it. I've actually misspoken already. Roman Catholicism exported Christianity around the world in the colonial era. And of course, it was known for a very brusque and aggressive strategy of sometimes baptizing natives against their will, sometimes conflating what they're doing with the role of the state. And that's to be understood because it was in the realm of Christendom where there wasn't a clear delineation between the church and the state. But even so, there hasn't really, in the early church and the first millennium of the church, at least, there was not an intentional, we need to organize and send missionaries over here and convert the pagan hordes over here. There were individual exceptions like St. Patrick in Ireland. There were others that decided to evangelize to the pagans. But even so, something new really did happen as Western countries spread around the world and centralized their resources, and they sent missionaries out. And of course, Methodism, the tradition I'm a part of, has a lot of missionaries abroad, not just in the United Methodist Church, but the GMC is getting into that. And there are a lot of people who are Methodists abroad in the world trying to minister to people there. But it hasn't always gone well. And there are alternate models of mission. In early Methodism, in the days of John Wesley, weren't a lot of missionaries, but the word spread and grew to new peoples, and that was something that happened organically, not by central organizations. So I started reading this article yesterday by Ministry Watch. No, that's not the right. Why does it always do this to me? Here it is, Making Global Disciples. I hadn't heard of this organization before. This is just a short article. I found it interesting. Christians are operating a general store in northern Nigeria under the nose of terrorist group Boko Haram, reaching their neighbors with the gospel and hosting a worship service in their store's back room. They are indigenous or near culture disciple makers who have been trained under a model developed by Global Disciples. For 28 years, Global Disciples has been committed to training indigenous or near culture leaders to make Christian disciples among their own people. It recognizes that during the last century, the world's population of Christians has shifted from 80% living in North America and Europe to the majority, 2/3, living in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. This population shift calls for a shift in mission strategy, which of course, but we just often don't think about these things. Rather than sending Western missionaries to plant churches, Global Disciples works with a local cluster of churches to develop a training program for their own people to be near culture disciple makers. Then the new converts want to gather and grow spiritually, so they establish churches, founder Galen Burkholder said. According to Global Disciples, 25,000 disciple makers were trained around the world by the nearly 3,500 active training programs operating in 76 countries around the world last year. More than 69,000 new believers were reached with the gospel based on the efforts of the disciple makers that have been trained in these programs. There's a bit more to this article, but I don't want to read the whole thing. If you didn't get the general concept, it's not we're going to parachute in people from a foreign culture into a native indigenous culture and bring them Jesus. Rather, there are people already in almost every people group that have been converted to Christ, rather than Americans going and exporting the faith of Jesus Christ. How about we use people native in the area to transmit it in ways that are much more culturally savvy, where it's not as conspicuous or loud or, here's what happens, especially in the modern world, is if you go in as a parachute drop, then there are all kinds of accusations of white supremacy and imperialism or neocolonialism. These are all things that we see all over the place. Well, what happens if we just let the people run with it? The what happens when you just send the Bible to people in other cultures generally, and I don't say this, I took a course on missiology in seminary, and I read several books by the main guy, Robert Wuthnow, uh, I think was his name. But what's happened in many parts of the world is we give them the Bible and they say, oh, you guys don't even know what you have here. This is a culture that's much more like ours than yours. We understand Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the patriarchs. We understand the Israelites. We understand what it means to be in covenant with God in ways that require faith and vulnerability. And then it's when native people get a hold of it, indigenous people, that you can step back. We might be standing at a point in history where we don't need to be. And in fact, what I would probably say is in the West, we don't need to be exporting our version of the Christian faith. It's already too late. I mean, we carried the banner and the standard for a long time. And then that's, in Africa, for instance, where Methodism spread, it's there now and all of the leadership is African. But even so, they are carrying forward the faith that was handed to them by Western missionaries that went over. And that's the terms in which they speak, as the United Methodist Church has turned from its doctrinal moorings. A lot of native African voices have been saying, you guys are the ones that brought us this faith, and now you're going to turn your back on it. And that's a sad thing about the West right now. We've lost a lot of the discipline, a lot of the obedience, a lot of the faithfulness that we once had, where we took the gospel to other places. Now, people, and this is not tongue-in-cheek, need to come from those areas and re-evangelize America. There was a Babylon Bee article about it, but it's not really satire. We need to be re-evangelized. But in the meantime, there's this question of, we in the West are materially gifted. How is it that we are called to use our giftings for the benefit of Christ's church throughout the world? And I think that means we have to find ministries that can and should be supported. And of course, there are all kinds of mission agencies that you can and should support. But it might be worth looking at, what is this organization called? Global Disciples. It might be worth looking at them and seeing, okay, do I need to potentially start throwing my weight behind these guys? Because this method might be more effective in this global moment. So I just kind of thought, I just published before we started going this morning, an interview I did with Joshua Nelson of the Barnabas Conference. They have a model for church planting and serving rural churches that I did not know existed nowadays. So what are the models of church planting that we want to look at? What are the models of mission that we want to look at? I think it's good. It's nothing but good to look at all different kinds of models. This might be a model worth supporting. So, y'all, as you continue to learn more about it, feel free to let me know additional details. I'm at plainspokenpod@gmail.com. And if it's a movement that has legs, then let's throw our weight behind it, because every tongue will confess, every tribe and nation and race will be represented in the kingdom. And I just think it's riveting to be a part of that work.